thing called biomagnification. You spray at low concentrations, but that DDT is then absorbed by microorganisms that are eaten by bigger organisms, and at each level up the food chain you concentrate it. So by the time you get to the shell glands of birds or the breasts of women, you've concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. We didn't know that. It was only when eagles began to disappear in the United States that biologists tracked it down and discovered biomagnification. How could we regulate DDT when we didn't even know about biomagnification? CFCs. When CFCs were invented, we thought they were a great discovery. And only years later we discovered that CFCs float up in the upper atmosphere, and ultraviolet light from the sun breaks chlorine off CFCs, and chlorine destroys ozone. When scientists began to say that, I didn't even know there was an ozone layer up there to destroy. How could we manage technology when we are so ignorant about how the world works? And for me, that was a real crisis, because we couldn't stop technology, we couldn't stop new developments, but how do we ensure that it doesn't cause environmental damage? For me, the big shift in the way I looked at the problem came in the late 1970s, when I learned that there was a battle over logging going on in what used to be called the Queen Charlotte Islands, Haida Gwaii, the islands off the north coast of British Columbia. For years, environmentalists in Haida had been fighting against the logging practices of the industry. So I decided to go and do a show on this for the nature of things, and I flew up to Haida Gwaii and I interviewed loggers and forest company executives, politicians, environmentalists, and I interviewed Haida. That was my first real contact with First Nations people. Now, I knew that they had over 50% unemployment in Skidegate and Masset, the two Haida communities. I knew that loggers, the white loggers, were using the stores and shopping in the two communities, so they were adding economic value to those communities. So I said to Gujau, a young artist who was leading the fight against it, I said, Gujau, why are you fighting against logging? It brings economic benefits to your people. What difference does it make to you if the trees are gone? And his answer was amazing to me. He said, yeah, well, if they cut the trees down, we'll still be here. But then I guess we'll just be like everybody else. We won't be Haida anymore. And when he said it, I didn't understand what he was talking about. And it was only days later when I was back in Vancouver and I was looking at the rushes, and I realized that simple statement, we'll just be like everybody else. I realized that to the Haida, they don't end at their skin or their fingertips. To be Haida means to be connected to the land in a profound way. That the air, the water, the fish, the trees, the birds, all of those elements are what make the Haida who they are. The land embodies their history, their culture. The very reason why Haida are on this earth is told to them by their connection with the earth. And that is a fundamentally different way from the way we look at the land around us in the dominant society. And ever since then, I've been a student. I've been learning from First Nations people. I'm here to thank you for all of the Aboriginal people around the world for teaching me, and I'm still learning. And I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate to work with the Ainu people, the Aboriginal people in Japan, to work with Aborigines in Australia who have given me a name. They've honored me by giving me a name. To work with the Inuit people in the Arctic of Canada, with the Kayapo Indians in the Amazon in Brazil, and with the San people in Botswana on the Kalahari Desert. And everywhere I've been, it's the same. They speak of the earth as our mother. And they tell us that we are created out of the four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And as I learned these lessons from Aboriginal people around the world, I realized environmentalists, we had framed the issue the wrong way. There's no environment out there, and we are here, and we've got to regulate our interaction with it. We are the environment. There's no separation. What you do to the environment, you do directly to yourself. Now, what does that mean? As a scientist, I have come to understand what these ancient notions are. Every one of us, the minute we left our mother's body when we were born, the first thing we needed was a breath of air. That first breath was to inflate our lungs and to announce that we had arrived on this planet. And from that moment on to the last breath we take before we die, we need air 15 to 40 times a minute. And we don't even think about it. That simple act. For the next minute, I want you to think about what a breath of air is. So easy. 2 to 3 liters of air deep down into our lungs. And you've all seen a fresh set of lungs, and you know when you touch them, they're kind of mushy, squishy. They feel funny. The reason lungs feel so funny is they're mostly made of air. Our lungs are made of 300 million structures called alveoli. They're little capsules that are clustered like grapes around an alveolar duct. We need 300 million of them to give the surface area to come into contact with the air. If you flattened out the alveoli in our lungs into 2 dimensions, they would cover a tennis court. That's how much surface is all wrinkled up in our lungs. And each alveolus is lined with a 3-layered membrane called a surfactant. The surfactant reduces surface tension, so when the air comes into the alveolus, it sticks to the surfactant. And immediately carbon dioxide from our bodies rushes out, oxygen and whatever else is in the air rushes in, hemoglobin molecules and red blood cells grab onto the oxygen, and with each beat of our hearts, that oxygen is pumped to every cell in our bodies. And when we breathe out, you don't breathe all of the air in your lungs out. If you did that, your lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in your lungs even when you breathe out. So the point I'm making is there's no separation. There's no line between the air and us. The air is in us, it's stuck to us, and it's circulating through our bodies. We are air. And when I breathe out and you breathe out, well, out here it kind of diffuses around, but if we were in a room, very quickly every one of us would be breathing each other's air. And when I say this in a room, when there are kids in the audience, I see some of them go, "Ooh, yuck!" You know, what do they think? They have a little bubble of air that belongs to them? The air is something that connects us. What comes out of my nose goes up your nose. I am air. You are air. I am you. We are all linked in a thin matrix of air around the planet, not just with all human beings, but with the trees and the birds and the worms and the snakes that are all using that air. We're just this layer of living things, all connected by the air. There's a wonderful experiment a scientist named Harlow Shapley in the United States did many years ago. This is a mind experiment. He said, what happens to 1 breath of air? Well, how do you follow a breath of air? 98% of the air is oxygen and nitrogen. Breathe it in, oxygen and nitrogen go in your body. A lot of the oxygen never comes back out. That's why we need air every minute of our lives for the oxygen. 80% of the air is nitrogen. Goes into your body. Most of it comes back out, but some of it stays in our bodies. But 1% of the air is an atom called argon. Argon is an inert substance. It doesn't react chemically with anything. You breathe it in, it goes into your body, breathe it out, and it comes right back out. So argon is a good indicator for a breath of air. It's 1% of the air. So Shapley said, how many atoms of argon in 1 breath of air? And he calculates it's 3 followed by 18 zeros. 3 billion argon atoms in 1 breath of air. So when you breathe out 1 breath of air, where are you, Joanna? 1 breath of air coming out of Joanna's nose. Very quickly, all of us around here are going to be breathing gazillions of argon atoms from that 1 breath. But of course, we're out in the open. That breath is going to spread across your community, across